Hello, everybody, and welcome to Right Rose. Tonight I'm joined by Brandon Straka, the founder of the Walkaway movement. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
So, I wanted to talk to you because we have a crisis happening in New York with this mayoral election. You've been talking about it, trying to raise awareness about it. So, to start off, how bad is the situation with that's going on?
How bad is the situation? That's an interesting question. Well, I guess it depends on how we are gauging bad. I would say, so what we have right now is a Democrat socialist candidate. His name is Zoran Mamdani, here in New York City. He won the Democrat primary. That would have been what, April or May, I believe. And it was kind of a surprise because we had Andrew Cuomo running in the primary, and I think people just naturally assumed that he would come out the front runner, but he wasn't. So we have in New York City this very interesting thing called ranked choice voting. And for anyone who
Hmm.
doesn't know, essentially, there's like multiple phases of voting. So you get like the first round, and then if you make it through to the next round, it's a whole thing that's probably too much to explain right now. But Zoran Mamdani ended up getting something like 460,000 votes in the first round of the primary. And then with ranked choice voting, he got pushed over to about 560,000 votes, which pushed him ahead of Andrew Cuomo. And he ended up becoming the Democrat primary winner. So now we're in a situation where Andrew Cuomo threw himself back into the race as an independent candidate. And then we've got Curtis Lewa as the Republican candidate. And we also had the current mayor, Eric Adams, in there. So he dropped out. But it's messy. The whole thing has been messy since the very beginning. Now we've got Adams who's dropped out. So it's essentially Sliwa, Cuomo, and Mamdani. Mamdani is maintaining about a 45% polling average. Uh, uh, Cuomo's got about a 35% polling average, and then Sliwa's been pulling up the rear all along at about now he's at like maybe 20% pulling head, maybe a small amount. So that's where we are in terms of polling. How does this actually translate into real numbers now that we're in the final week? The election is 1 week from today. Early voting has already begun in New York
Hmm.
City. But what we're seeing is some interesting things. Early voting is up like over 500%
Hmm.
from any other previous election. What makes it interesting is that they're finding that about 60% of the people who are early voting are over the age of 50. That includes in the borough of Staten Island, which is
Yeah.
solidly red. So we won't know until we know, but one could interpret this to mean that anti-Mamdani voters, which I would presume a lot of people over 50 are going to be, are coming out in record numbers, which could potentially put all these polling numbers. Uh,
It's important that people understand the context of this because when he was winning in the polls, I was talking about it and people were like, oh, it's never going to happen. Let's just dismiss it. It's not a big deal. And then Cuomo started to sound the alarm in like an oddly normal way, becoming very much a voice of reason in a strange pocket. And now that we have this polling going on, is the argument from your perspective, from what you've seen, that if Curtis was to drop out, Andrew Cuomo would have a better chance? Is that real or is that just a sort of a Republican talking point at this point?
no, I think it's real. I do think it's real. I think
Yeah.
that a lot of it's interesting. So let me dissect that a little bit too, because like a week ago or more, if you had asked me that same question, my answer would have been solidly that Curtis Sliwa is pulling too low, and that probably the best thing that could happen would be for him to drop out of the race because when Adams dropped out of the race, Cuomo surged by 10 points. Now,
Okay.
at that point, Adams was pulling at like 10%. So the interpretation was that Cuomo picked up nearly every Adams voter when Adams dropped out.
Yeah.
Now, from the conversations I've been having on the ground and all over the city with people over the last 4 months, I have found that SLEWA voters have articulated that they are willing to hold their nose and vote for Cuomo if they have to.
Wow.
Cuomo voters don't seem terribly enthusiastic about voting for Sliwa because they
Yeah.
find him to be too far right and too extreme. So you're going to hear a lot of Republicans say Cuomo should drop out because Sliwa's the right guy and
Hmm.
because, now the final thing I'm going to say about that is that um, after these two debates that we had just in the last week here in New York
Yeah.
City, the mayoral debates, Curtis Lewa really came out swinging, and basically his message was, why is it my obligation and my duty to
Hmm.
help Andrew Cuomo win his election? Andrew Cuomo has the option right now to woo and court Curtis Lewa voters. He can be doing that right now. And number two, if he was such a great candidate and didn't have all of these problems, why wouldn't he be able to run his own campaign and do his own thing? And I mean, honestly, I really thought about that and it changed my mind a lot. I was like, he has a point. Like, why is he obligated to drop out to help Andrew Cuomo win when Andrew Cuomo does have all of these problems as a candidate? So, I mean, it's a super messy election, and I think what it's going to be, what it's going to be, and it's definitely an uphill battle at this point. I think to defeat Mamdani, I don't think it's impossible, but it's an interesting race for sure.
And in terms of how extreme Mamdani really is, like we're hearing different positions. I see him say something that seems a little more extremist and then he pedals back. In terms of how he's campaigning in New York, like what is the reality of that? Does he seem much more socialist than we know? Is there an issue with like connections to Islamic terrorists and things like that? Is that a real thing that's happening in New York?
I believe in my gut that he's more socialist than we think he is or that we know he is. I do think that he's intentionally campaigning on a more kind of temperate, moderate policy position and an attitude that I think he thinks will be more palatable to a mainstream audience. But that to me is the reason why he's backpedaling and walking back a lot of things he said in the past, including, he's was very, very strident about wanting to defund the police and
Yeah.
like, all of those things and his policies about wanting to decriminalize misdemeanors and things like that. And now he's kind of doing this whole like, oh, I didn't really say that, and that's not really how I feel, and I'm apologizing to like a dozen police officers and
Yeah.
blah 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 blah. I don't believe it for a second. But I do think it's been kind of effective because a lot of the people who support him and the many conversations I've had in debates and interviews, a lot of these people seem to believe that the definition of socialism or his definition of socialism is an expansion of social programs
Yeah.
to help support more people who are struggling in New York. And the belief is we've got so many wealthy people and billionaires. Why shouldn't the billionaires pay to expand the social programs? And that's what this definition of socialism is. I think that Mamdani is perfectly content for people to believe that that's what socialism means and that's what his intentions are. I think in my gut that it's probably his intention to grab the steering wheel and take the reins of power, and then we're going to see a much more truly socialist slash communist uh, plan put into action. I think that's what his real intentions are.
And I've heard accusations from grassroots activists who are on the ground on the Republican conservative side, even just independents, that the RNC didn't care that much about this race, and that there wasn't a lot of effort to curtail this, that there wasn't a lot of attention. Was there Republican interest early enough in it, or did they kind of put it like to the side and say what's going to happen is going to happen?
I haven't seen it, and I think that they put it to the side and said what's going to happen is going to happen. And Um, I'm a fairly well-known person. I'm a fairly well-known conservative activist, and we've been really fighting now for at least 4.5 months here on a daily basis. We have done at this point well over a dozen rallies, live street debates. We built a canvassing effort of over 670 volunteers that have to help us with making phone calls, sending text messages, canvassing, door knocking. I've been putting out these, I think, pretty great videos,
Yeah.
anti-Mamdani videos, and on all different topics from rent freezes to what like socialism just hasn't really been done right
Yeah.
yet, or Mamdani's crime policies, and all sorts of things. Um, we haven't heard from anybody, in the RNC,
Really?
and oh, not at all, no. And certainly we've been, trying to incorporate getting as much help. And the thing that I find really astounding too is I've been doing this now for almost 8 years. Like I know better than to reach out to the party
Yeah.
for funding, things like that. So I would never do that. So I haven't even been reaching out trying to say like, hey, will you help financially support what we're doing? It's always just been sort of like, will you help amplify what we're
Yeah.
already doing? Like, will you email these videos out? Will you
Hmm.
share them on your social media? Will you let people know we're doing a debate or we're doing a rally? I mean, we don't even get responses. So,
Yeah. I mean, that was my suspicion. I've seen that. I have family in New York who's been following this very closely, and they've said, I don't see any Republicans out there. I don't see a grassroots effort. And if he gets elected, if Mamdani wins the actual race, do you think he's actually going to be a doer? Is it going to be a situation where we feel it, or if you're in New York, you feel the difference in him being mayor versus Adams, or is this kind of like just somebody that wants to be in the like the fame world?
well, okay. So, first of all, yeah, I think he's going to try to do as much as he can. I think he's going to meet a good amount of resistance, both like from the Trump administration and possibly local politicians, and business owners and corporations and things. So I do think that he'll get some resistance there, which could be significant. But I think it's important to remember too that it's when you talk about like, are we going to feel it? Are we going to feel it in our everyday lives? That goes for me beyond just policy. And that kind of taps into, I've been talking a lot about what I call like the three pillars of Zoran Mamdani that I find concerning. One are his policy positions, but two is his rhetoric, and three is his radicalized base. So even if we didn't feel it as much in the policy positions as a lot of us are concerned about, I think we're definitely going to feel it when the person who has the loudest megaphone in New York City is using his
Hmm.
pulpit to espouse the very same rhetoric that led us to Black Lives Matter, that has
Yeah.
led us to a radicalized Antifa, that has led us to the Palestinian rioters and protesters. And then that leads us perfectly into the radicalized base. I've lived in major blue cities most of my adult
Yeah.
life, and so I've been there for the BLM riots and looting and stealing and violence. And I was there. I've been there for Antifa. I've been there for all of this. So I think that those groups feel emboldened when they have a leader like Zoran Mamdani. And I think that Zoran Mamdani is the type of leader that would stoke that kind of division and the flames of those groups that cause that kind of anarchy and
Hmm.
chaos. So just I guess that's my way of saying it goes beyond just policy. I think we're going to feel it in the way we're treated on the street. I mean, I
Yeah.
think I say that both as a white person and as a conservative. Mamdani engages in a lot of anti-white rhetoric, and he engages in a lot
Hmm.
of anti-Trump and anti-conservative rhetoric. And of course, I don't need to tell you where anti-Trump and anti-conservative rhetoric has led us to this point where
Yeah.
people like ourselves now have to be fearful of being attacked or even shot or
Yeah.
anything else.
I mean, that's very true. And I've seen the anti-white rhetoric. I don't think it's gotten enough coverage. I think conservatives have been slow to it, aside from people who are on the ground there. And just sort of in closing, the sort of Andrew Cuomo aspect of this has thrown a lot of more attention onto the race than I think it would have gotten originally. In terms of Andrew Cuomo, like we hear that he's very deeply unpopular. We hear that he's somebody who's trying to rehab his career, which he obviously is. But in terms of on the ground supporters, does Andrew Cuomo have a base? Is there real support and appreciation for him as a viable candidate in this?
Yeah, there is. So what's interesting is that his base tends to be more moderate Democrats, which
Hmm.
in this case is very good because Zoran's base is going to be almost exclusively radical leftist, far left progressive, if you even can call them Democrats anymore. I mean, whatever. Sliwa's base is more exclusively pretty hardcore conservative. I mean, he's actually considered, and perhaps this is just because we're in New York City, but Sliwa is considered pretty far right. I mean, he's people in New York think of him as like a right-wing radical almost. And Cuomo somehow seems to sort of grab up a lot of those people in the middle who, again, I keep saying, but it's important to remember this is New York City. So you might roll your eyes like thinking like, Cuomo is a moderate, like,
Yeah.
but I think for the people of New York who, we're now at the point where we're about to elect a communist. He is moderate in the way of thinking of a lot of people in the city. And so, the hope is that he'll be able to scrape up enough people in the center left and the center right that maybe we can defeat this guy.
I certainly hope so because I think Mamdami's identity politics coupled with socialism is a recipe for disaster,
Agreed.
especially for a city that's seen so much already. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this. Where can people follow you to pay attention to what you're doing?
Well, people can always go to walkawaycampaign.com. Our movement and our mission goes on and on. So please go in there, join our email list. Please join our texting list so we can keep in touch with you. And if you want to follow me, I'm on all social media platforms. That's X, Facebook, True Social, Getter, Instagram, YouTube, and Rumble. It's my name at Brandon Strock, and my last name is spelled like Straka, Straka. So at Brandon Straka on all platforms.
Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you all for watching Right Rose. We'll be back next week.